Eric Brazau has spent the last 15 years of his life exploring the perceptions around Islam today in light of what is believed and said about Islam within Islam. I'm very excited to have Eric in the studio with me to prepare for this live aired sneak peek. Eric, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Wade.
So the first question in this quick sneak peek is, you mentioned something about there being 70, some 72, some number around 70 different sects of Islam that are mentioned in the Quran. Tell me
Yes.
about that.
Well, in the Quran, it mentions there will be 73 or 2 sects vying to be the true representatives of Islam. Of course, all but one will be fake and false, and one will be the one that actually gets to go to paradise.
But these are considered sects, i.e. they're considered Islam, and Islam is one, but there are these variations, and most of them are false, and one of them is true.
Correct.
Having said that, we're going to talk about the impact of Islam as a whole on Western civilization in this show. You mentioned the word hafez. Tell me and our audience what that is.
Okay, a hafez is someone who has committed the whole Quran verbatim to memory, and they can recite any verse at any time. Most people who are hafez are not going to be found in North America. They will be found in Africa, in Asia, parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan. For the most part, there are what we would call madrasas all over the third world. When someone cannot afford to feed their children, especially the young boys, the madrasa takes them, feeds them and houses them, and of course gives them Islamic instruction. And a large part of Islamic instruction is to memorize the Quran.
So from my perspective, this is one of the things that I've personally found very heartwarming, that that children and thus adults would have learned to have memorized actually the whole Quran, it being a considerably smaller book than the Bible as a whole, Bible being 66 books compiled. And yet what I understood from you is that that's not a high percentage of Muslims that have memorized the Quran or know it that well. And your point was that, a fairly large percentage don't really know what's in the Quran at all.
That is correct. I've had many conversations with imams, especially 5 and 10 years ago, who in the days when I used to argue with them, they would say, no, it doesn't. And I would pull out my Quran and show it to them. They'd say, I never read that.
But that's in Canada, right? So it may be that in Canada it's a little different than in certainly Islamic nations.
Well, I'm not saying in Islamic nations. I'm saying perhaps, but in Islamic nations, they all have read the Quran, and they're learning the Quran as childhood and in elementary school. I'm talking about in Europe, in America, most Muslims have not read, from my understanding, have not read the majority of the Quran. They read verses, of course, but they haven't read the Quran.
We'll unpack that a little bit more on the show, and I'll just mention why, because the audience may be coming to the mind of some of the audience as well, which is that in the Bible, for example, it says, by their fruits you shall know them. So I'm going to dig into that on the show. The audience can look forward to that. But in this sneak peek, I've got one more question for you. So what is being taught? You've shared with me that Imam Bilal Phillips, who is a very celebrated, relatively famous imam with a lot of followers, perhaps even globally, has taught that about the call of Satan idea, that Satan is there trying to pull people away from God, and that musical instruments are his tools, and that all musical instruments are part of the call of Satan. So that's an example of one of the things that's being taught. Is that correct?
Not only is music the call of Satan, but he goes on further to say that all bells, especially church bells, are satanic.
Interesting.
Interesting. Yes, because apparently Jesus did not approve of church bells, and church bells is an invention after Jesus, therefore it's satanic. That's how they come to that conclusion. Now, that is not him saying it, that's him saying it based on and reading the hadith, which is the Islamic doctrine.
I'm actually familiar with a variation of this from within my own background as Christianity, and sermons that I heard by ministers that spoke about bells as being somehow impure and evil. So that's fascinating. Friends, audience, this is Eric Brazau, spent 15 years studying into the impact of Islam on Western civilization. You can look forward to episode 96 coming up on April 30th, 8 p.m. Central Time, the Created Image of God show. Until then, may God be with you.